Welcome to episode 21 of the Liz McMullen Show. My guest this evening is Kathy Rowlands. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Oh, welcome yourself. Thank you for having me. And it is C.P. Rowlands. That's my published name.
Oh, okay.
But Kathy, it's just so long. Catherine P. Rowlands. I mean, that goes on, for the whole page of the cover. So
Probably.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I mean, my proper name is Elizabeth Everly McMullen. I go by Liz, but one of the funny things is, having it's not a generic name, it's a common name, Liz McMullen. Uh-huh. So when I was looking for a handle on Skype, I had to go for Lizzie McMullen.
I saw.
And, it's funny because, yes, Lizzie has been my nickname. Normally only children use it. It's a term of endearment. Like, I have one friend.
Okay, I qualify for that. All
yes.
Right.
I was like, of course. And so, yeah. So anyway, so I've had some, authors call me Lizzie, and I was like, God, that's just so strange. And the reason why I did Lizzie's bedtime stories is because I thought it had a nice ring to it, but I still go by Liz. I feel like I'm more a Liz than a Lizzie. When I'm with little kids, because I do have an education background. I have a master's in education. I have a long-standing history with early childhood. So the little kids call me Lizzie, and there was this one year, my mom's also a nursery school teacher, just retired, and this one year there were 2 Liz's in my mom's 3's class, 3-year-old kids. And then there was me who would come visit sometimes. I think I was 12, and just a few blocks away from where we lived is where my mom worked. And I was Big Lizzie.
Gee. Okay, Big Lizzie.
I was Big Lizzie. As opposed to like Little Lizzie, not like, living large and in charge. I was tall. I was 5'6" in the 5th grade. So, and I'm 5'8" now. I didn't grow that much more.
I heard that part of another of your interviews. I want you to know I'm 5'2".
Yeah.
So, Mutt and Jeff.
My first girlfriend, my first serious girlfriend, was 5'2".
Oh.
Yes.
Well, we're energetic.
Well, she was what I call like a little mighty mite. She's like a little butchy butch with like really muscular arms and body and whatnot. She's just, like Shrink-a-Dink. She's smaller. She's smaller. But the funniest thing, that was interesting for me walking around with her is I wanted to walk with our fingers interlaced, right? Problem is I have big hands and I have strong, not extremely thick fingers, but I've got bigger hands. And she had small hands, but also with, stout fingers, so we couldn't interlace because the length wasn't there. Swear to God. Remember, it just struck me so silly. We were both 21, just out of college.
Just babies.
We were just babies. And so, in order to hold her hands as we were walking, I just have to have my fingers together in her hands, almost
Sure.
like the formal kind of thing, because we couldn't interlace, so it wasn't going to happen. And the funniest thing, I have pictures from my graduation party, and there's this picture, she's looking at me, but because I'm 6 inches taller than her, she's looking at my breasts, what little I had of them at the time.
Of course she is.
But it's not like she's checking out my rack. It's just that's how tall she is.
Yeah.
Though sometimes I'm sure she was checking out what little I had to offer.
Let's hope she is. Oh, come on.
I was flat-chested when I was skinny. I'm serious. So she could look in the general direction where breasts should belong. Anyway, now I'm plus size and I've got breasts, which is great. It's one of the things I'm pleased about, being overweight.
I have to say to you, one of the advantages of being short is you get a really full-on view of people.
Uh-huh. I have a friend.
And it's expected of you because you're that height. I also can identify people from their belt buckles.
That's
I'm not
excellent.
Kidding. You think I'm kidding.
I don't think you're kidding. I think you're telling the truth.
I got really good at that.
I have a friend of mine who's 6'3",
Oh.
and she is the only time ever I have had the view that most 5'2" women have of me. As in, my eyes were even with her breasts, pretty much. Which were.
And what did you look at?
her breasts intentionally because they're fantastic.
Well,
And
there you go.
she actually let me put my face between them too, which is awesome. It's one of those like lesbian privileges. You get to do stuff that, you know, straight men can never get away with. But like, we're like, whatever, we're girls. Girl part's awesome. Anyway, so you were going to tell me, we're off.
Of lesbians,
Speaking of lesbians, we were off air. We started to talk about, you know, the history of, you know, what you've experienced as a lesbian. And you had said that the first time that you heard the word lesbian was when you were a sophomore in college?
In college. And I honestly, that was a whole big trouble. In those days, girls
Do you
were
mind telling us what decade this was?
Oh, no, I don't mind at all. Late 50s, early 60s, okay?
Okay.
In those days, boys and girls' dorms were separated. They weren't integrated yet. Now, I knew the word gay because I knew a gay guy, actually, in high school. And, oh, he was a nice guy. He died of AIDS later, about 23 years later. But I knew him, and I knew what he was. And he and I, in a little town in Iowa, everybody knows everybody, okay? There are no secrets. So I went to college in that same town. And so it was a casual conversation, and a couple of girls from Chicago were talking about lesbians, and I said, "What is that?" And they just stared at me like, "You idiot." And well, I was an idiot, you know, in that respect. Really,
you were sheltered.
And I read a great deal. You know, there wasn't anything around except Mary Renault and people like that in the way of lesbian, gay literature. Or at least I wasn't subtle enough to pick up on it. And ironically, that was the year that my English professors began to point out these things in books to us as a class, you know. Oh, this man or this woman was such and such. So thank God they taught me. And so for the longest time, almost a week, I thought they were pulling my leg.
Where were you in college? Where did you go to college?
Grinnell College in Iowa.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that college?
No, I am not familiar with it.
Oh, it's a good college, very good.
Yeah, I went to...
By the way, the president of the college is a gay man.
Oh.
He was the head of the World Health Organization. He's quite a gay man, and he has a partner and a little boy. Really neat guy. Neat man. At any rate, so yeah, this is long before then. At this point in time in my college career, we were being called Pinko Commie because we were so liberal. The whole college was. My first history professor was a man named Joseph Dunner, who was on Hitler's most wanted list.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, you snap the girl off the farm and throw her in that atmosphere. Woo! Mama. But that was the first time, honestly, I heard the word lesbian. I didn't know they made a separation. See, I knew that, of course, there were women and women, but I didn't realize that there was another word for it.
Did you realize that you were interested in women at this time?
Yes and no. The usual.
Uh-huh.
Just like, well, why didn't that guy work out? I liked him. You know, kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
You know, I didn't know where I was drifting off to. It took me, I was married twice, Liz. Mm-hmm. Damned if I wasn't going to prove my family wrong, right? Absolutely. Yeah, got married twice, had children by the second marriage, helped to raise his 2 kids. So the 2 of us raised 4 kids. Mm-hmm. And then finally it just didn't work, and I met a woman. Uh-huh. And that was all she wrote.
And the angels sang.
There was another issue in there besides I met a woman. Mm-hmm. It all kind of coincided in about 2 months, and it was very confusing. Believe me. Here I was with 4 kids in the house. I met a woman, and he had some problems, and oh, whoopee-doo. And we were, both of my husbands are dead. We were friends practically till the day he died. So, he held me, and as I told you in my bio, I had an art career, and he was one of the biggest, he was just a neat guy to have around. Even long after we divorced, he helped me. He was very helpful. Very good friend of mine. I was always the kid's father, and we never had the usual, divorce fight kind of thing, because we both all of a sudden just sat up and said, oh, wait, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I was very upfront and honest with him, told him the way I felt, and he was honest with me, and blah, blah, blah. So it worked out.
Well, that's,
and I'm very happy with my kids, by the way.
Yeah, and you'll still see these days a lot of, and I think it's still, you know, sometimes it's cultural. Like my Latina sisters, there are a lot of them who end up with child or married because they're not ready to come out. Many of the reasons why is the way that their families would react to it. So they try the straight thing.
Yes.
And many of them have babies, you know, and then are like their children may be 7 or 8 years old, and they're finally, you know, going to the lesbian bars and dating and being, you know, comfortable with it, who they are. Whether or not they're out is, you know, up in the air as well. But there's still that going on. A lot of people in, you know, young baby dykes and even people, you know, within, I guess, their 20s or what, may not be familiar with what it could feel like to feel like you needed to be in the closet, like there weren't any choices. And it's not just back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s for that matter. It's still alive and kicking, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, although you've got to respect culture. I do. And I don't think that's an age thing. I think it's a family, you know, as I wrote you, I come from a large family on both sides. And we weren't allowed to make, in my family, and this is really odd because my family loves to talk. Mm-hmm. They love to talk, especially they love to debate politics. But they love to talk. But the one thing, you weren't allowed to use cultural slurs or anything like that. For example, my grandparents raised me until I was 8, and I never knew until I had 2 kids already. I never knew my grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness. And she raised me, and I never knew it.
Wow.
And my granddad was sort of an atheist kind of guy. Mm-hmm. I never knew that. We weren't. Those were things that were when we argued it. And
religion was not on the table.
Well, what I'm saying is, I was just raised to be non-judgmental. Mm-hmm. That's the best way to put it. My grandma was a midwife. My granddad, as I said, was an inventor. He actually owned farms. Mm-hmm. And but he invented, and he really was good at what he did. Invented a lot of really cool stuff. And but they, you know, what drifted down to the kids did not. They kept it between them. It was really neat. It was a cool background for what I set out to do in my life. I've had a really good life. Oh my God, what a great life! I don't think I could have squeezed much more into it. But I will tell you that I did not know I was a lesbian for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it probably was a cultural thing, you know. Yeah.
For me, I was raised by hippies.
Yeah.
And
long live hippies.
So I was just
a little hippie, by the way.
I was just slightly a wild child, like a lot. I'm much more mellow now. You know, I'm 36. But I was just a little. I was like what they now called a spirited child. You know,
isn't that a kind word?
It is just such a bullshit way of describing such a pain in the ass child that I was. Spirited, just spirited. And then I didn't realize that I liked girls until I was 19. Like really, not even a clue, and which was surprising for me because my feeling on it was, you know, if I like girls, it's fine. You know, if I like guys, it's fine. You know, I didn't have prejudice or any internal homophobia. I just never met a girl who, you know, blew my skirt, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so people like, you didn't know.
I'm going to write that down just a minute.
Because it's the alternative to float your boat. It's blow your skirt.
Sure. Okay.
Whatever blows your skirt, you know. Not that I wear them very often, mind you. Anyway, as we've been talking, I realized that part of the reason why we're together is actually to discuss your writing. So when did you get the writing bug?
I forgot that. No.
It's like, don't. This is a review episode, Kathy.
Okay, you want to know why I started writing?
Yes, tell me, well, writing in general, and then tell me when you started the lesbian fiction writing.
All right, this is a quick story. When I was in college, what I really wanted to do was journalism.
Okay.
And the man that paid for my college education was the man that ran our company business. And he said, no, you'll do what I want you to do, which is politics. So I ended up a history, political science major. Mm-hmm. But I also, now, you got to remember what time period I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. The person, generally speaking, the man was the head of the household. And that really was true, by the way. In a kind way. He was always a very benevolent person, okay? Mm-hmm. I don't want to say that he was mean, he wasn't. But he was very firm about it. And he said the journalism, especially for women, was a trashy job. That was one of his words, was trashy. And he wasn't slurring me, he was just telling me this. All right, so all my life what I'd done is just simply draw one side of the paper and then write the story on the back side, see, as a kid growing up. And it kept me occupied for hours, and my grandparents were happy with it, and the family was happy with it. Mm-hmm. So I started out writing that way, but the thing I got into was art. I got into art and other things, and politics, of course. So I said to my partner, Gloria, 24 years, I said, when I retire, I think I want to stop art, and I think I want to try my hand, at just writing and see if I can do it. Mm-hmm. By that time, I hadn't read any lesbian fiction. Now, maybe you're in the same boat, Liz, I don't know, until the 90s.
Yeah, because
late 90s.
Yeah, I came out when I was 19, and that was in...
Gee, last year what?
I came out when I was 19, or realized that I liked girls when I was 19, and that would be 96. And I discovered lesbian fiction by walking along Christopher Street, which is the queer street in New York City. And there was a bookstore called Oscar Wilde Bookshop, which is closed now since the bust, the bubble bursting in 2008. So they just couldn't keep it going, amongst other stuff because of Barnes and Noble and the, pretty young ebook lifestyle, because not everybody had an e-reader. Now it's something more common. Something I have. That's how I read people's books for the show, and it's much easier on publishers because they can send me a review copy of your book, and it doesn't cost them something anymore. There's the money that they spend to get it put together, but once it's done, that's the end. They don't have to store it. They don't have to ship it. It makes things easier. But it closed. But when I went there, it was for, I usually didn't have money even to buy books. I didn't have money. It's broke. But I would go and I just hang out and talk, or I'd sit on the floor in the lesbian section and just look at the books and whatnot and, long for them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I didn't, and I was completely out of the loop. Even though I went to that store, I did not really get into reading lesbian fiction maybe 2005, around then. And then I just went through wildfire. But I still am familiar. Whatever was in front of me. And then, I got in on Facebook, and it was very daring of me to decide to friend somebody who is an author, because I didn't realize that it's great for them too. At the time, I was like, oh my God, the author's actually going to friend me on Facebook. This is amazing. I was like, that is just so cool of her to let me be her friend.
Touch.
So as a result, I was learning more, and I got really focused on bold strokes because I always liked the stuff. So I would pretty much buy almost every bold stroke author that there was. And then I started the show, and I was like, I don't want people to think I'm an unofficial employee. Bold Strokes, because I'm not. They do not give me any kickbacks, And
I do know.
Yes. Yes, there's nothing, other than giving me a copy of the book. That's pretty much the long and the short of it. But I have authors who are from different publishing houses, people who are self-published, just a lot of variety. And now I'm actually, because of the show, which has only been around since November 2012, this past fall, it's like I am learning so many other authors that I would have just been completely ignorant of if I just continued to do all my shopping on the Bold Strokes Books website. So my horizons have been broadened even in the last year.
Good for you. Please stay that way. Not that I don't know if you know that I was the first Bold Strokes ebook.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes, and Carson Tate with lesbianlove.com was right behind me. Lake Effect Snow was her first ebook, and Carson's book was number 2.
Yeah, one of the funny things I learned when I was on the Cocktail Hour interviewing Kim Baldwin was that Kim Baldwin was the first author other than Radcliffe who was a Bold Strokes book author, which it was just happenstance, because I was like, I asked her, who's one of your sheroes? And then she talked about Radcliffe and explained it and how Rad has actually got in touch with her and had liked her novel, and she just was over the moon. She's like, I can't believe she's contacting me. Like, this is crazy. And then...
Well, I'm in awe. I'm in awe, too. Yeah.
Yes. One of the reasons why I have been so loyal to Bold Strokes, just as a fan, is I just love the way they treat their authors.
They're wonderful. And I've been online. I've talked on the Yahoo forums and any place else that'll have me about, about how absolutely good. One of the first things, and of course I've been in business a long time in my life, that I like is an immediate response, and Radcliffe gets back to you. I don't care if she's in Timbuktu. Somehow or another, that woman finds a way to get back to you.
She does.
She gets right back to you, and she has Sandy, her helper, her assistant. One
Sandy
of the two
Lowe.
will get back to you instantly. And kind boy, let me tell you, very kind and respectful. Yes. Of course, I've never had an argument with him. So I don't know what that's like, and I don't know anybody that has very well. I don't know anybody personally that has, so I imagine I'll find somebody someday.
So, of course, there will always be sour grapes somewhere, no matter.
Oh yeah, well, and it's not even sour grapes.
No, I'm teasing.
Sometimes it's just not a fit.
No, I was thinking about fruit. Actually, there was this quote. Fruit. F-R-U-I-T, fruit. I was thinking of this Dita Van T's quote, and she's like, you may be the ripest, juiciest peach, but there'll still be somebody who hates peaches.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah.
So how did you find you liked writing as a child?
That's
you
right.
went towards artwork as, for a good amount of time, and then decided to return to writing. Did you immediately decide that your writing would be lesbian fiction?
I did. Well, by that time I was early 60s, and I was like, and then I met a couple of things happened. Number one, I was reading all these books. And number two was that I met a reporter. Gloria and I made friends with a reporter, and who had been all over the world reporting. Now, she basically was my Annie from Lake Effect Snow. Lake Effect Snow. She had the most amazing stories, Liz. Just incredible. And the photos to back them up. She was seriously wounded in Afghanistan and did subsequently die. She was even older than me, so, it was not only, I used to tease her about that, but that was my basis for beginning a book. And at that time, that was, when I started the book, it was probably 2002, maybe because we were in Iraq by 2003. And I also happened to get in touch with Annie Garrels, who wrote Naked in Baghdad, and who is just a heck of a reporter, for Pete's sake.
Mm-hmm.
She was the ABC bureau chief in Russia until they chased her out. And I mean, they chased her out. She was in Kosovo, and she was one of 16 Americans left in Baghdad when the Americans came in March 2003. Mm-hmm. And she wrote about that experience. I just have nothing but utter respect, and I know Baxter Clare is the same way. You know,
she's fantastic. Baxter is just absolutely fantastic.
She's amazing. I've read all her Franker books, every one of them.
Yeah, the book that
I absolutely love that writer.
Did you? I know she's phenomenal. Did you read? Now, how could I possibly blank on the title? The River Within. The River Within.
Yep. Oh, sure I did.
That was phenomenal. And the reason why I bring it up is because it was a foreign correspondent who was the character who had been always in what she called the stands, which is like Afghanistan and, you know, whatnot. And that was a phenomenal book. Very well written.
And, it was a beautiful book. I read it twice. I don't think I wrote her because I didn't know how to reach her at that time. Mm-hmm. And now I know somebody who knows how to reach her besides yourself. And I'm going to sit down one of these days and just send her, when things quiet down in my house, mm-hmm. I'm going to sit down and just write her and tell her, you know, what a beautiful book it was. And, all her books are good. The Franco series is just super. You noticed a little bit of touch of the problem of alcoholism mm-hmm. in my book, in Jacob's War. Yes. And I was basically just trying to hit addictions. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I wasn't picking it out.
With Lou.
Yeah, Lou. And that's a whole other story, which I don't have a problem. Thank you, God, for that. I've lived around it, and I don't like it, and it's ugly, but all addictions are ugly.
Could you, because I want to actually parlay into talking about Jacob's War, can you give us a little bit of background, how you started to write it, and a little blurb as to, basically an overview of the book?
Let me say this. My opening paragraph in the book itself...
Excuse me.
Okay, I might. Says this. Just let me read this to you.
Sure.
In acknowledgments, if you notice, I dedicated the book to a cop. And that is somebody that I wish everybody knew what a heck of a girl she is. First woman to become an officer, a sergeant. And the youngest, she was only 30 or 31, the woman I dedicated the book to. Mm-hmm. All right, here's what I say in this first paragraph. 23 years ago, we bought this house. That is the house I'm talking to you from, Liz. Mm-hmm. And met a wonderful family several houses away. They were a traditional family with 4 little boys, mother and father. The youngest was in diapers, and that is true. Yes, he was. He was just a doll. They were true neighborhood kids, and we loved them. And oh, my God, did we ever. Those little boys helped us year-round as they grew up. They even brought in the groceries, mowed our yard, and shoveled our walks in the winter, and usually without money. I mean, we didn't pay them. Now, today, 2 of those little boys are in jail due to drugs. And that's what started me on this book. The youngest boy that I just talked about that was in diapers started coming to the house, and he wanted more yard, which was fine with me. And I'd always, tip him big until I suddenly realized that he was high, and I'm like, what? Come on, I'm an old hippie. I know what high is. And sure, I didn't inhale. But, no, I didn't really. I stayed away from drugs. I really did. They just scared I come from my immediate house. My parents were both addicts of one kind or another. And so I know about addiction, and boy, that scared me. So I got a hold of his mom and dad who had split, they'd divorced. And then, gee whiz, I come to find out the second youngest boy was also having drug problems. The 2 oldest kids did not. And it just broke our hearts. And so I just began real lightly. I was finishing up collision course at the time. And I began to make cop contacts. And that's how I met the woman that I dedicated the book to. She liked a book of mine. She wrote me. And I said, by the way, would you give me some information, because here's what's going on in my house. And it started there, and then some other friends of mine stepped forward, until eventually, before I was done writing that book, honest to God, I have a file box, you know, one of the old-fashioned file boxes, full of testimony, information, some discs and things about meth, about addiction, you know, just various things. And so I ended up, my main driver for this was the person I dedicated the book to, and the ATF special agent in charge in Milwaukee, who has since retired. And was a woman not much younger than myself, and very, very good at her job. The ATF is a really interesting organization. In that, and also my best friend from high school was a cop psychologist. She did, you know, she was not only a cop on the West Coast, but she was a psychologist as well. And someone that I respected and admired to the end of my days, because that's really a tough job where she was. And so she gave me a lot of information as well. But that's how it started with us, with the little neighborhood boys. And I thought I was past being around people with addictions. And all of a sudden, it began to just kind of blow up in this town. 3 blocks away from me, I had a hair appointment. And here's the ATF, the DEA, and local cops around this house, and a young girl had overdosed on heroin. Well, when they opened the apartment up, they were not only making heroin, but they had a few other little goodies, designer drugs and things like that going on. And the boy that was living with her, and I say boy because they were 19 and 20, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, oh God, I thought things were bad when everybody my age was doing drugs, It was nothing like this. It was just an epidemic, and we're not fighting it well. Nixon started the war on drugs, and it was just a big money drain, and it is to this day.
Yeah. I have an aunt and an uncle. One of them has passed away. And when I was growing up, basically this is what I think that happened to the two of them. They were the babies, the younger side of the spectrum of 7 kids. And So my father graduated college in 70. My mother graduated in 71, and they got married. So they were hippies. And the thing is, my father was kind of the midpoint. Or, I think he was like third one down, something along those lines. And the problem was the younger kids who were in their early teens and being surrounded by all these drugs and how common it was very easy to stumble into. Like my aunt who passed away, she was in high school, and she had broken up with her boyfriend, and it was a terrible breakup, and it really shook her. And then she just got into the wrong crowd, and that's all she wrote. She died in her mid-40s. Her body just kicked out. And my uncle has been sober for a really long time, but he had a learning disability, and at the time in the in the 70s and whatnot, in the late 60s, they didn't really know much about it, or he was just considered not retarded, but he was treated that way, so he became the class clown, and got into comedy, stand-up comedy. And from everything that we've seen on TV, a lot of drugs with stand-up comedians, especially in the 70s and the early 80s, cocaine and the amphetamines and whatnot. And they actually made his eyes distend somewhat, kind of like Rodney Dangerfield, who's passed. So, I mean, he survived. So anyway, so growing up, I was born in 76. So growing up, and especially when I became aware in the 80s, is when you have junkies and alcoholics around you, it's the perfect anti-drug. Because especially when it's no longer cute, especially when you're no longer young and, a little bit of a mess. When you're in your 20s, 30s, and your life is completely trashed and you're looking ragged, and your life is just the bottom rung, so to speak. And watching that, I was like, I never want to be that. I never want to do that. And no matter how wild I was, drugs were never going to happen around me. And I used to joke that I was like the anti-drug because, in college, people are smoking marijuana and whatnot. And I was like, no, I'm not into it. But I mean, I wasn't judgmental of those who decided to do that, and I did my fair share of binge drinking, really smart shit you do in college. But, I wasn't comfortable with drugs.
We don't even want to go there.
It's like I wasn't comfortable with drugs, people using drugs, but I never said anything about it, but I must have exuded something. Because even one of my girlfriends post-college, she used to smoke up a lot, and she told me, my last girlfriend didn't like how often that I did this, and we broke up, and I said, well, I'm not going to tell you anything about it. And then eventually, she slowly weaned herself off of it, not because I said anything, but just, I guess it's not fun to get high when the people that you're with are not also getting high with you. So eventually she stopped smoking. But not because I said, you awful, you stoner, you have to stop this. No, she just ended up stopping.
Well, then how do you feel about legalizing
marijuana?
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot of misinformation. Recently I was on Facebook, and there was this picture post where it was showing before and after in terms of alcoholism, before and after for meth. Because meth, as you talk about in the book, meth makes your teeth fall out and your skin goes sallow and whatnot. And then they had a before and after picture of somebody who smokes marijuana. Now, obviously their point was there was nothing different before and after. I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. There are people who do it casually, but somebody who does it often, I was like, first of all, you're probably going to gain weight because you get the munchies. And depending on how much you smoke, it does make you a little spacey. That's why I think some people call it dope. It's not something that, is going to make you razor sharp. It's not necessarily, the power drug that's going to help you do anything other than chill out, man, relax, it's fine. That's not exactly going to make it rain in terms of your life, financially, security, whatnot. That doesn't mean that successful people don't do it, but I think that there's this whole thing, there are all these carcinogens in cigarettes. It's not like that with marijuana. And I don't know how many people you've seen do this, but I often see people mix tobacco in with their marijuana when they're smoking it. So my point being is that it's not as benign as many people would like it to be. I do understand that prescription drugs are, just as awful. There's this sign. I used to do the 6 mile walk along the Hudson River across from Manhattan, and they had this thing that said, if something along the lines of, be careful what you keep in your medicine cabinet, Grandma.
That's right.
Because your grandkids will go in there and cannibalize it, and they have parties where they take all these prescription drugs and they throw them into a bowl.
That is happening here. So
they do that, and they have no idea exactly what they're doing or what kind of side effects. And being addicted to pain prescription medication is no different than being addicted to heroin. It's not a better addiction because you can get it from a doctor. But circling back to marijuana, my feeling is that there's things problematic with anything that alters your consciousness. There's also you could have a racing heart, it could affect, everybody thinks it's a mellow out thing, but it can affect your body. So I don't think there's any drug out there that, this is completely benign, we should legalize it, whatnot, it's fine.
Here's my problem with this. It's sort of like abortion. And I'm not going to squirrel too far here, but my answer to abortion, the anti-abortion people, is if you can tell me how you can feed these kids, which is what my book's about, by the way, the one I'm just about to submit. If you can tell me how to feed these kids, then I might change my position. on abortion.
Because
But
these
nobody
people
can
are
do that.
pro-birth.
They can't.
That's the difference between being pro-life is really not pro-life. They're not concerned about the lives of these children once they're born. And if they're on public assistance, they like to excoriate them for being so and not pulling themselves up from their bootstraps. But they want you to give birth to the child. They don't give a fuck what happens after the child is born,
true.
honestly.
Yeah.
So
That's true, but I'm serious. I have yet to have, and I'll bet you I've asked that question at least 100 times. I've stood in their faces and I've said, look, convince me, but tell me how you're going to feed them. And they have no answer for that. Well, in a way, marijuana, and I'm going to pull this together.
mm-hmm.
Marijuana is like this because if you only look at the figures that I was given for the cost to fight drugs, of course they take marijuana first. It's easiest to find. It keeps your quota up, So the real truth of it is, no matter how you feel about drugs, if you take marijuana off the local cops version of, I can arrest that person and get a mark, to my, that means I've made one arrest for drugs,
mm-hmm.
kind of thing. You understand what I'm
mm-hmm.
saying? We need to start spending more money on, if we're going to spend all those billions, and it is billions, Liz, on drugs and fighting them, then it shouldn't be marijuana. That's, we should go for the things like oxys, stuff like that do the real damage.
Heroin
and those parties that you just talked about.
Yeah, all those meth and whatnot. And I don't disagree with you in terms of allocation of time and funds. And one of the other things, it's still a larger issue, but it really needs to be more about like the suppliers and the dealers, and not be punishing so much the addicts.
Okay.
But I mean, and there needs to be a place to put them. They need, money needs to be invested on helping them get and stay clean and have jobs and hope and something along those lines. But you're not going to get it by, you need something a little bit further up the food chain. So pulling it back, because we can talk about this.
That is Jacob's War.
Exactly. Talk a little bit about.
That's exactly what I wrote about.
Okay.
When I was sitting in a room listening to cops or agents or whoever, it didn't have to be an official. My eyes would just glaze over when they got into the chemical analysis. That thing. That's why I only had one chapter, really, about the effects of the drug. And I had the other chapter of the effects of alcohol. But the truth of the matter is, the real money for drugs, is not coming from the guy on the street. God, that's a horrible mess. It's not coming from the runners. It's coming along silly lines. And by the way, the little gang that I described doesn't occur in our city, in Milwaukee. But there is a little gang like that, and it is easy to do what they're doing. It's right in front of your face. It's right there. I'll tell you somebody else who gets involved in this, and that's people my age. If they need money, they know how to get it. They can sell their drugs. You just wouldn't believe it. You would not believe it if you saw some of the statistics on that. And I agree with you. That's why I went after the guy in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I made him as he was, because he was a criminal.
This is Michael.
This is Michael.
Mm-hmm.
He was a criminal. He did exist. He was sent to Leavenworth and he died there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not certain of the circumstances of his death, so I'm not qualified to talk about that. But that is how they found him. In our own town here, we just had an enormous, a year and a half ago, we had an enormous seizure of drugs in a doctor's office that I knew really well. And they put that guy right, in jail.
It's the white-collar criminals that...
It's the white-collar. I mean, it's just like life is today. Everything is at the top. The money sits up there. And then they mess around with it, and they get the people on the street to do their dirty work. And then you have the problem. You mentioned the addicts.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is where I think we're going to see us go.
Mm-hmm. So, about Jacob's War, Can you tell us a little bit about the main characters, Kate Blackburn and Allison Jacob?
Oh, I love Katie Blackburn.
She's fun.
Well, okay, first I write my little attempt at romance, which is Collision Course. And I have a character in there that dies named Nikki. And Nikki just wouldn't leave my mind. So, and I kept trying to get away from her, And one night, Gloria and I were sitting here watching television, and there was a woman advertising something, and then to make the segue between that and the next advertisement was a lady named Katie Blackburn. Mm-hmm. I turned to Gloria and I said, oh, that's her name, Katie Blackburn. Okay, that's where I got the name. Mm-hmm. But the real character is from Nikki in Collision Course. I just hadn't written her out yet, you know. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to use her, and I did work in Milwaukee for a number of years in business, and this kind of business that she has it really is that kind of business. I don't know a person in a small advertising agent, although I've done a lot of advertising in my life, in radio and other things, art, and so I'm familiar with it, so I'm on solid ground there. I, of course, have never known, until I wrote this book, an ATF agent. AJ just kind of occurred to me.
And she was so unusual. She was so unusual. Like, can you... Like the clash between when Katie first meets Allison, AJ. Can you can you summarize that moment? Because that was I think I learned the most about who Allison was by how they interacted with each other. Okay.
I don't know personally any undercover agents, all right? Mm-hmm. That's I can really talk about from fiction and from some nonfiction works that I've read. Mm-hmm. So she's kind of an amalgamation of all of those characters, you know. But she has a different, since their assignment for this case is different. They're not going for the street people. They're going for the big guys. Mm-hmm. She has to be a little quiet, and she has to be able to be, she's an ex-undercover agent, and therefore she doesn't have your standard cop reaction to, you know, she's going to be a little more subtle, a lot more friendly. She is a lawyer by trade. Now, that person I have known. I've known a lawyer who does criminal work, and I'm not talking about Carson Tate, you know. I'm not talking about a person who I'm certain does a lot, her fair share of criminal cases, but, and I don't know about that, all right? But I'm talking about a lawyer who I have in my family a person that went to West Point, became a lawyer, and then went into the field, spent some time in Afghanistan, and I've done some talking with them. So that's where AJ's background came from. Mm-hmm. And there was an Ecuador incident in there, so that's fairly legit. You know, I mean, I stood on pretty good ground there, too. Mm-hmm. But that's where AJ came from, was all those characters that I've read about.
Mm-hmm. So the first interaction, well, you get to meet Katie, where she's the typical workaholic, and she's leaving her place of business late again. And the security guard said, well, you know, a little while ago there was this white truck, and that's something that pops up tons of times in the book. And then Katie she's going to her car, and then she sees this woman bleeding in her car, and she realizes that she's still alive, and then says, this girl doesn't have time, I'm going to drive her down to, you know, urgent care and get her dealt with. You know, she's 30, we have to do something about her. So she does this, you know, this great deed, you know, we find out who decided to put Seraph in the car later down the line. But she decides, okay, I'm going to take care of this, you know, I'm going to, you know, do the good citizen thing. And then it turns out that the cops are treating her car not necessarily as a crime scene, but as evidence. So she gets it impounded, and she ends up in Allison Jacob's office livid, because this isn't just any car. This is her father's car.
Mm-hmm. The ex-cop.
The ex-cop, and she's got her own little history with law enforcement, so she's not hostile towards them. She understands it. But she's just so pissed.
She is pissed.
She's so pissed.
I actually, before Cindy, my editor, saw it, I had her a lot more ramped up, and then I thought, well, that's kind of silly. She'd be in control because she owns her own business. She's very much, she knows where she's going, what she wants, as I show later on through the book. And so she wouldn't like throw an inkwell at her or anything like that,
no.
or a shoe at her or something like that. But she's caught right away by her good looks, that kind of thing. There's an attraction there. But she's mad. She's really mad.
She's hot under the collar. And for me, reading it, I was like, oh my God, she's just going to be so much more pissed because she's, stirred up a little hornet's nest. She's gotten herself in the thick of things. And I'm waiting for Allison to very diplomatically grill her. To see if she's a part of this whole system, and whatnot. And instead of making it into this huge event, it ends up being a little smoother. But she gets in, she's like, this Allison Jacobs, she's not like other cops, and her business card is a little different, and her energy and approach is a little bit different. But what I found really ironic about the story was the role of Allison's group is to gather information and go towards the top. It's not to bring in, to like arrest whoever's supplying them. They want the big kahuna. And even though it's supposed to be something, I guess, low risk, there are bodies dropping everywhere. Something.
7 murders.
It's like, it's supposed to be so simple. And then it's not, and it's complicated, and you think that there's this boogeyman, which is like the enforcer, Elena, from the street gang that's distributing the drugs, and Michael is not really the head of the gang. He's just the money. He's the suit who gets things together. But anyway.
He is a klutz.
He's just...
He is a klutz, and he's not.
He's just
he is
not.
Exactly as I describe him as, I've learned him. He is off a farm, not in Kansas, but I made that up. Of course I did. And but he was a big farm boy. He was like Allison saw him, big and blonde and friendly, Midwestern. But he had enough brains to know where to put money. And that's the way I wanted him described. And he was seriously. He did some damage in the city that he worked in. And when they found him, and that was like a decade ago, actually, they began to, the whole shift went the other way. It was like, how the flock of seagulls goes, not the song, or not the group, but you know how birds shift in the wind? Agencies began to look up, and look up, and look up. One would have thought, and this was my feeling when I was talking to law enforcement people, agency people, was, well, but why wasn't this thought of a long time ago? I would have looked up first, because where else would they have gotten the money?
Exactly.
And I think probably in places away from where I talked, they had looked up, but I just didn't talk to anybody that had been, involved in that. And when I don't know my information, I don't want to write about it. I don't want to make it up, so it's just totally unbelievable.
Yeah. So the book keeps on progressing, and one of the tensions, like when it comes to a romantic, I guess a romantic, it's not a romantic detective story. That's just not the way to phrase it, but let's just move on from that.
But what is it? No, maybe it is,
Maybe.
Well, because Allison doesn't, there's a couple of things working with Allison. A, she suspects all these things. Because I think, and I'm going to tell you this, Liz, everybody that I met is just a naturally suspicious person. And I can say the same goes for politics. Those two things. They're naturally They want, you'll get a hail fellow, well met attitude from them, but underneath they're looking at you twice.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I have found to be just wonderfully consistent. Okay, so she's worried about two things. She's worried that Lou's going to come back, or lose contacts, or there's something about Lou. Well, it turns out to be, Michael and Elena and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But so I wanted Allison to always be on her guard. At the same time, she couldn't resist Katie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I wanted her.
Yes. And I thought it was an interesting way to introduce Lou as this woman who's obviously sloshed.
Yeah.
And ends up having a nasty spill. And
she had a heart attack, is what she did.
Yes, she did. Which was like the impetus for it. And AJ's first instinct was to help her.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like there are these little seeds that are so much the key. There's that moment where we're aware of Lou. And then there's the moment we're aware of Seraph, or how we're pronounced her name.
I pronounced it, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I used, because I initially started out titling this book, The Crystal Angels.
Oh.
And then I discovered online that there were about 8 million books written about crystal angels. So
we have to rethink this. Actually, the other thing that I had expected and didn't come to fruition for Jacob's War is I literally thought that she was going to go apeshit. Like, I was waiting. I mean, not that she didn't, rise to the occasion and that they didn't work out stuff and whatnot, but I expected, first of all, my feeling is like, oh God, Katie's going to get abducted.
Okay, no, wait. Yeah, because you don't want to give away the end of the book.
No, but
I want to tell you that will be addressed.
Yeah, the thing, but
I've never written a sequel before, so I wasn't quite sure how to set it up, you know what I mean?
I'm expecting, because for Jacob's War, I'm like, oh my God, she's going to go apeshit. I'm like, Katie's going to be, this is my imagination, mostly because I've read a lot of detective novels and whatnot, so I was like,
sure.
Well, of course, in order to get to to Allison, AJ, they're going to have to do something awful to Katie. So I'm imagining Katie's going to be, taken to the farmhouse where they do the cooking of the meth. And, this is what I'm cooking up in my head. Obviously, I'm not going to resolve it because I want people to actually pick up the book and see what the fuck really happens.
Yeah.
But that's what I thought was going to happen. It's kind of like those moments. Like, there's a series that I read that's a cop series. And there was the romantic, like the partner of one character, and she went through so much in the last book, and I was like, you can't, because I could tell like the drug dealer was kind of scoping out a location, and not just a drug dealer, was like mafia, and I was like, oh my God, they're targeting her again. I can't read this, so I stopped reading the book. I was like, she was hit by a car, and she had some level of brain damage, and she recovered. And I was like, you can't target her again. I can't deal. So you get used to these, I don't know, they call them tropes, or not even cliches, but it's one of those things that you're going to see in film, or read in a book. Like, of course, there's going to be a time when this person gets kidnapped and all hell breaks loose and whatnot. So I'm waiting for it, and it's like, where is I'm expecting this bloodthirsty war where AJ is stopped being sweet and starts being really serious, and it didn't, it was not a character.
No. And I did that on purpose.
Yes, it was not a character. Yes.
And it just, because I wanted to write right from I'd say when I was 2/3 the way through this, I decided I was going to write a sequel. Mm-hmm. So I've never done that before.
Uh-huh.
And I've already got about 10,000 words, okay. But I'm finishing this other book first.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to talk to you about that because you're in my field.
Okay.
But at any rate, so I wanted Allison to be really, really subtle.
She really was. I have to give you props because there are I wouldn't call them cliches. They're realities. There are a lot, for example, in Baxter Claire Troutman's series, the Franco series, Franco's got a serious alcohol problem.
Yes.
Serious alcohol problem. So, like, all the different things that you encounter.
That last book about killed me.
Yeah. So, like, all the things that you encounter with law enforcement is, like, after a while, being in the muck and the mire and all these really dark experiences and seeing the worst parts of humanity has an impact on somebody. And for Allison, she's not untouched by it because she's had some pretty serious experiences, but she's not this heavy-handed or icy or hardened person.
No. I suspect in the sequel that there's going to be problems for Allison.
Mm-hmm.
After all, what occurs in the book, I want there to be an answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't quite sure, and I had a totally different ending. And my editor and Rad had a few comments too about it. So I changed the ending a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's still kind of up in the air where I leave it. And so then the next book will address that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a new character coming in, and this is someone that I met. Two things happened from my work with this book.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done research like this, ever, in my life. Not for writing. I've done it in history, I've done it in politics, I've done it other places. But I've never done anything like this for writing. And I'm telling you, Liz, I was absolutely worn out. I was exhausted with that book. It just exhausted me. So I was kind of sitting downtown here in my own hometown, and I kept seeing in front of me, and I'm going to do a little tangent here, children, little kids, 7 and under, running around this area where I was. And I looked up, and it was the city's, not the federal, it was the city's homeless child care center, which is what my next book is about. It's a romance, primarily. But it's all about what are we doing with these children, okay? And so that kind of affected how I ended Jacob's War. As I'm going to go into the next one, it's going to be a little rougher, a little bumpier, and it's going to take place in northern Wisconsin. And I don't know, have you ever read Robert Goldrich's The Reliable Wife? Okay. Or Jill Adamson's The Outlander?
I have not. I just, just for a moment, we're going to have to tie this together because the episode is only an hour long and we can go on.
I'm sorry.
No, I just, and I am so sorry because I do want to continue on and explore a lot of things that you're mentioning. Maybe I'll have you on again when the book you mentioned about children.
I would like to talk to you before I write that book. Before I finish this book.
Sure. You and I can talk personally. It's just that our trusty fans, I like to keep the episodes down to an hour.
I would.
And so we're
you
approaching.
kind of glaze over after a while.
Exactly. Like we're approaching that moment.
Store.
And yes. No matter how wonderful, there's only so many swaths of time people can put together. So I want to end the episode actually with a book giveaway. Now, we need a question that somebody has to have read one of your novels in order to answer. Do you want to pull something from Jacob's War? Or would you like to pull something from Collision Course, something a little earlier on?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, let's pull it from Jacob's War, all right?
All right.
Who was, here'll be the question. The head of the Milwaukee Special Forces Unit's name is Bill Whitaker. And who was the young officer with him?
Good question. And we didn't even bring that up during the interview, so that's perfect.
Do you like that?
That's pretty snappy.
That's snappy.
That is snappy. So basically,
See, now if I'd have been the hippie and done all that weed, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
fantastic. No, that's wonderful. So you have to, the young officer, you need to get his name, and that's something that happens earlier on in the novel.
Yes,
So
it does.
email the LizMcMullenShow@gmail.com. With your correct answer. Those who answer correctly go into a pool, and then I have a number randomizer that I got off of the internet, and I pull the answers that way, and you can choose whatever book of your choice should you win, and let me know how you would like to have it inscribed. So we'll do that. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been a wonderful conversation and lots of fun.
Interviewers.
We're talking about like lots of buttons. Lots
Now
and
that I
lots
know
of
your
buttons.
entire drug life,
Yes, my drug life.
I could post it on Facebook and you'll be sorry.
Oh no. I mean, it's so funny. I can't remember who told me this. But one of my guests was like, I know everything about your college years because I've listened to all of your episodes. And I was like, oh my God. Yes, I talk about my own life a lot. So people will know me very well if they become loyal listeners to the Liz McMullen Show. So email the answer, and you don't have to grab a pen, because you can either, by watching the slideshow, you'll see how to find my email address, or I post it on Facebook as well, so you can do it at your leisure. And then hopefully you'll win the book of your choice, and that'll be wonderful. So thanks again for coming on the show, and I'll have you on again for sure.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.